All right, welcome back to the second walkthrough for the Odyssey annotation. So in the last part, we just read Homer's description of this beautiful island filled with delicious, amazing food, but it's completely lawless. So for this next part, there's a just a little part that's in italics. This is just going to give us a clue as to what we are about to read. Odysseus then describes how he and his crew land on an island that is opposite to the Cyclops' island. It is filled with goats, so the whole crew is able to feast and relax on this peaceful island. Now sunk the sun, and darkness covered o'er the face of things. Honestly, what you're probably asking yourself is, why can't they just have said, the sun set and it got dark? And that's kind of where we are with reading some of these very complicated epic poetry. Because in order to have it sound, in order to have it metered, in order to have it sound like a poem, often they have to switch around nouns and verbs in order to make it sound like a poem. And so instead of saying the sun set and it got dark, sometimes poets take some opportunity to add more florid language that is descriptive, but also has a little more to it. And when and us as readers, reading some of these more complicated poems that are fairly old, it is kind of our job to try and translate exactly what they're trying to say in a language that we can understand. While this is English, part of it is translation. And so now sunk the sun, and darkness covered o'er the face of things. Basically says the sun set and it got dark. Along the sea beat shore, satiate we slept. So we have to figure out what satiate mean. To satisfy. So they are satisfied. They just found a peaceful island filled with goats, and they've gone onto the island satisfied, and they slept. But when the sacred dawn arising glittered o'er the dewy lands, guess what? This is another way of saying something like the sun rose, period. Just a fancy way to say that the sun rose. The sacred dawn arising glittered o'er the dewy lands. If you don't know what dew is kind of those drops of mist that spread across grass and plants before the sun rises. And so as the sun hits this dew, it makes everything look glittery because the drops of moisture reflect the sun as it hits it. And so the poet is thinking, I'm going to describe this in a very specific and sometimes beautiful way, of just saying, instead of saying the sun rose, he wants to be more figurative in his language and more descriptive with descriptive imagery. However, for us, we can appreciate the descriptive way, but for us, really, we just need to know that the sun rose. I called. I is Odysseus. So Odysseus. I called my fellows. These are the people that he's traveling with. And these words addressed. So he said a few things. My dear associates, here indulge your rest, while with my single ship adventurous, I go forth the manners of you men to try. So he's saying that some of you are going to say, some of you are going to stay. So indulge your rest. Indulge means to just get really into resting, while he's going to take one single ship who are going to need to be adventurous. I am going to go forth the manners of you men to try. Some of you are going to stay while some of us are going off. Whether a race unjust. So he's saying, I'm going to be looking for something. And whether that they are peoples or a race who are unjust, who don't do things right, of barbarous might, barbarous, make sure you're using the definition, rude, offensive, cruel, or violent. So he might be finding people who are unjust, people who are violent or cruel. They're rude or unconscious of a stranger's right. Unconscious of a stranger's right, sometimes there's this notion that you should be always a good host, that you should be, if someone is in need or someone that you've never met, you want to sort of welcome them with open arms, even though you don't know them. And so he's saying that these people might not know of that, might not know of allowing someone into your house even though you don't know them. Or, so they might be all these things, or such who harbor pity in their breast. Now, harbor is an interesting word. They might have a place of safety and comfort. They might say, I have in my heart or breast pity for those who might be in need, that being Odysseus and his crew. They might revere the gods, meaning they might honor tradition, they might honor manners, they might do which is right, and succor the distressed. Succor is also an interesting word. Something that you do or give to help someone who is suffering or in a difficult situation. So they might be willing to help someone who is in need. So for this, I'm going to say Odysseus is saying he might find rude and cruel people, or he might find nice, hospitable people. He's just not sure. This said I climbed my vessel's lofty side. So he said it, and then he climbed up into his vessel. And the vessel is his ship. My train obeyed me. This is going to be a little difficult. A train can be, yes, like a train, a choo-choo train, but it can also be the people who follow him. So it can be a group of people, vehicles, or animals that are moving in a line. There's a lot of definitions for train. but this is the one. So these are the people that follow Odysseus. Now he's the leader of his people, and he has sort of an army with him. So there's a number of people who follow and obey him. In order, seated on the banks, they sweep Neptune's smooth face. So with this, you kind of have to imagine the ship. And this is Homer also describing the way something that's very simple in a very figurative language way. Now, I'm going to look for a picture. Let's see, Odysseus ship. And now they did have a sail in which they could use um, for propulsion of their ship. However, most of them also had these oars, and so people would be sitting along the sides of the ship, and they'd be rowing in unison. Probably someone would be banging on a drum, and in order to propel the ship through the water, they'd all be going at the same time using these gigantic oars. And so, in order, seated on their banks, these are the people who are seated along the sides of the ship. They sweep Neptune's smooth face. So, if you think about this, Neptune is the god of the sea. Sometimes you just need to search. Neptune is a planet that is eighth in order of the Sun. However, and I will make a note with this, Neptune is the god of the sea. He's also he is also a planet, but this is Neptune. Neptune's smooth face. So as they sweep Neptune's smooth face, are they slapping a god's face? No, this is imagery in which Homer is describing the way that they're bringing their oars back along the smooth face and cleave the yielding deep. Cleave meaning to separate into parts. They're cleaving, they're putting their oar into the water and cleaving the deep water to propel the ship forward. When to the nearest verge of land, so I'm just going to say here they are using their oars to move the ship. And for me, I mean, I'm going to be appreciative of kind of the clever use of language that Homer is using. But I also kind of, for my sake, I just want to be able to translate. When to the nearest verge of land we drew, fast by the sea a lonely cave we view, high and with darkening laurels covered over. So they came to another land, the island across the way, and they see a big cave where sheep and goats lay slumbering around the shore. Near this, a fence of marble from the rock. So they see sheep and goats, which they're probably thinking, oh, that looks pretty delicious. Brown with overarching pine and spreading oak. Homer's describing this physical landscape. And a giant shepherd here his flocks maintains far from the rest. Giant because he's a giant cyclops, and he's a shepherd, meaning he takes care of these sheep and goats. And solitary reigns, so he's all by himself, as we've seen in previous stanzas. In shelter thick of horrid shade reclined, and gloomy mischiefs labor in his mind. A form enormous. So here Homer is starting to describe the Cyclops in pretty horrific language. He's got gloomy mischief. He's always thinking awful things. He's an enormous form, not a shape. Far unlike the race of human birth. He's nothing like humans in stature, in the way that his body's built, or in face. He's a cyclops, he has one eye. As some lone mountain's monstrous growth he stood, crowned with rough thickets, so he's got some sort of like strange um, wooden uh, wooden crown or hat, and a nodding wood. I, Odysseus, left my vessel at the point of land, and close to guard it, gave our crew command. With only 12, so he goes onto this island to see what's going on with this gigantic Cyclops. The boldest and his best. He's going to take his best 12 men. I seek the adventure and forsake the rest. Then took a goatskin filled with precious wine. So he had gotten this wine, and we're going to read Odysseus explains how he got the wine by saving someone's life. We're going to skip that and go right to the next part. So he's going to take this wine on this adventure as maybe a good luck charm. All right, that's number 2. That's walkthrough number 2. We're going to stop it here. Watch the next one to continue on with translating this story.